Okay, welcome back everyone to the second of today's sessions. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce to you the renowned photojournalist, thinker and activist Shahidul Alam, and also another of our esteemed Photodemus colleagues, Sokphea Young. Unfortunately, Lucy Rizova, who was due to speak in the panel, has had to withdraw on health grounds. So we're sorry to miss her. But rather nobly, Shahidul has offered to take up some of the slack by expanding in slightly more detail his material and thoughts on the predicament of doing photography in Bangladesh. So let me introduce them both in slightly more detail before we hear directly from them. Shahidul Alam is a highly renowned Bangladeshi photojournalist, curator and activist, and it's a very great honor to be able to introduce him. He founded the Drip Picture Library in 1989, the Pathshala South Asian Media Institute in 1998, and the Chobi Mela International Photography Festival in 1999. His remarkable books include My Journey as a Witness, Skira 2011, and The Tide Must Turn, Shahiduls 2020. In 2018, he was arrested and detained in Dhaka for over 100 days following a live interview with Al Jazeera. He was subsequently recognized with the Humanitarian Award from the Lucy Foundation and named Time Magazine Person of the Year. He has major upcoming shows in Chicago and is a lead artist in the next documenta. So he's as busy as ever. The title of his presentation is Does Photojournalism Still Matter? Sokphea Young researched photography and politics in Cambodia for Photodemos and is a much valued member of the collective. He obtained a PhD in social and political sciences from the University of Melbourne, and his research has been published in numerous journals and as book chapters and working papers. He's also the author of Strategies of Authoritarian Survival and Dissensus in Southeast Asia, Palgrave 2021. And the title of his presentation is Citizen Journalism and Activism in Cambodia, the Boomerang of the Image. So we're going to hear Shahidul first, so over to you.
Yeah, you can hear me. Well, thank you for that very generous introduction, Christopher. I hope I don't bore too many people in the process, or deal with expectations too badly. I'll go straight into it. I'm no academic, so I'll talk in practical terms. I saw it with my own eyes, is what we say when we try and convince someone. And that essentially is what the photojournalist tries to do. We essentially do it through photographs, but what we say is, I was there, I saw it. When we ask questions about the validity of a photograph, however, we place the emphasis on technology. We ask if this photo was doctored, whether AI was used. It's a valid question, but I think it has limited relevance. We believe people's words depending on whether we consider them to be trustworthy. It's not the words that we believe, but the person saying them. Muhammad was an honest man. What he said might have been difficult to believe, but we believed it because the words came from Muhammad's mouth. The same applies to a photograph. Sure, technology makes it easier today to doctor a photograph or a video and make a convincing fake, but it is the source that we trust. That's why the word of mouth is so important. We believe those we know. By determining the veracity of the image based upon the mode of production, whether or not it's been physically adopted, we move away from a more fundamental attribute of the photograph. As individuals and as photographers, we choose what we see and what we don't see. We choose what we show and we do not show, where we direct people's eyes. Rather than talk in theoretical terms, I'm not very good at that anyway, I too want to show you. I'll come to that later. I do have some images, but I'll relate something that happened several years ago. It was during the invasion of Iraq. We were having dinner at the flat of a picture editor friend of mine in Paris. And the guests included photographers from a very well-known agency. And, you know, not that we're always aware of it, but gender segregation takes place in France as well. And pretty soon we realized that the men were in one room and the women were in another room. And my partner, Renema, was in the girls' room. And so later on, we were chatting about what happened out there. And she had some very interesting comments to make. Two of the photographers of this agency, men photographers, have been in Iraq. One had been embedded, the other had not. Predictably, the photographs were different. We appreciate that. However, for me, what was more interesting was how the two men themselves had apparently become very different. The person who was embedded, and I'm saying this from what Renema said about what the photographer's partner has said, so there might be gaps, but the person who was embedded was a young man in his early 20s. The soldiers he was with were a few years younger and saw him as an elder brother. He saw the soldiers not only as younger brothers, but also as his protectors. Perfectly valid. Earlier, when he used the term we, he had referred to the photojournalistic fraternity. Later, when he was using the term we, the expression we, he referred to the soldier community. And this shift was made very subtly without him himself ever realizing it, but his partner was the one who noticed this difference. Unsurprisingly, the stories he produced were dramatically different from the stories that an embedded photographer produced. Neither set of photographs had been technically doctored, but the embedded photographs had been manipulated by the environment the photographer had found himself in. Is one set of photographs less important or less real than the other? I think both are valid, but they need to be read in the appropriate context. I'll move to Bangladesh, which is what Christopher was telling me about, and that's where I work, that's where I do most of what I do. And I will share my screen at this point because I want to show you some of those images which relate to what I'm talking about. Let's hope it works. Yeah, are we there?
Yeah, you just need to go full screen, I think.
Okay, hang on. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
So essentially, this is some time ago. I mean, the garment industry about Bangladesh is something you all know about. So I'm not going to expand on that. But there's a 15-story building that was built by the Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers Association. Well, it's actually Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Employers Association, BGNEA, that's how we know it. They built it by illegally filling a protected water body. And there is actually quite a clear law about these protected water bodies and whatever. But not only did they do that, they built it on land they didn't actually own. But one prime minister, who's now the leader of the opposition, set the foundation stone for this building. It took a while to build, and by then there was a change of government. Another prime minister inaugurated the building. A 15-story building, which went up on land that wasn't owned by them, on land reclaimed on a protected water body. And apparently this whole building went up without planning permission. So it's quite bizarre in that sense. But these things happen. And we began to raise attention about it and, raise a fuss. And eventually the High Court did order it to be taken down. That's in 2011. But the building stood. The Garment Owners Association are a very powerful group. Most of them are members of parliament, so they create the laws. Obviously, they protect themselves in the process. Now, in 2012, there was a fire in Tazreen Fashions, a garment factory. And I went later to photograph what you see there, the images of the carcass of the garment factory. What we did, the garment industry uses, the fashion industry is very closely linked to the garment industry, and billboards are an important part of that. So we decided to build a billboard and set it up in front of the Garment Owners Association building. And while some of you will not be able to read, the red writing says Ar Noi, which in Bangla is no more. And then it's Shimahin Munafar Lobhe Garment Stromikir Oguntilash. Uncountable, innumerable corpses found in the pursuit of unending profit. That's what the slogan is, but essentially it's the carcass of the building. So we set it up in front of the Garment Owners Association. We didn't stop there. We then had a person sneak into the building and play a recording, quite loud, of the wailing of the survivors and the family members at the site itself. So when we play this, there is this sound reverberating all across the building. People come out. Outside, we had arranged a play, a performance, based on the death of the garment workers. So then they come to the performance, so they come further out, and then they find our billboard. They might not have seen it so distinctly otherwise. That was the way in which we were using these images. They come out here, and obviously it created a panic amongst the Garment Owners Association, and it was quite interesting what happened afterwards. So the government sent this armed vehicle complete with machine gun and things like that. And I found that quite interesting, quite apart from the fact that this is not the sort of attention I usually get when I do an exhibit or display my work. But when you see a response of that sort, you realize that, you must have done something right. You must have pressed the right button in some form. They continued to resist the court order. So we then made a billboard of the building itself. This is a panorama, there's the building, and we made a billboard of this image. You can see the building in the middle. You can see that the water body has been filled in the middle. So this is a continuous water body that's meant to be there. So we do that. Then this is me taking classes outside the building, outside the billboard. Of course, it got a lot of media attention. My own students started reporting on it, and the whole thing got activated. And it made it more difficult for the judiciary to ignore it. And the pressure, had an effect. And eventually, the building was demolished. I'm not saying we're the only ones who led to it happening, but it did make a difference. And I'll show you. This is one picture which is not by me. It's by my colleague, Habibul Haq. And as you can see, the building is now gone. We still have that landmass. So that's our next challenge. But, that was one that worked. We started a campaign called No More. You saw the words No More in that billboard. We started it in 2010. It started with a crossfire exhibition on extrajudicial killings, which is still going on, sadly. The government closed down our gallery. They closed down our gallery the year before. We'd done a show on Tibet. They closed it down then, but we learned from that. We took the government to court, and they did not have a legal basis to actually shut down our show. We had followed all the rules, and they said it was illegal. We needed permission. We wanted to see where we needed the permission. They couldn't produce the documents. We ended up in court. But what we also did, and I'm going to move to this, this is Mahishata Devi, the very famous Indian writer. She's passed away, sadly, an activist. And once they closed our show, we came out into the streets and we symbolically opened the show by Mahishata actually unhandcuffing me. So that was a sort of performative way for us to do it. But we did a few other things as well. We made a portable show. You can see the little briefcase-like thing on the brown briefcase-like thing on the bottom. That's actually a case for the photographs. We laminated the pictures, we put much more detailed captions on it and things like that. And we made 500 sets of that. So we actually had 500 copies of the exhibition. And we gave it away free to activists to set it up where they were. So this is one which is in the north of Bangladesh, and they've set it up on the wall of a school. They hung it on trees. They took it to bazaars, and they used things in whatever way they could. I'm going to move on to our current show. This is right now in our gallery. So it's about a fire that took place on the 8th of July earlier this year. And these fires keep happening and workers keep dying. So we put this show together. The government had initially identified 52 people. We had a team going out there asking questions. We discovered there were actually people outside of that who had not been counted. So we took passport photographs of them and put them in the show. We profiled all the 54 victims who were killed or were missing. And we made, this is a timeline that we produced going from 1990 to today of all the factory disasters that had taken place. And we had clear documentation of all of this. This is a picture. Last Friday, we invited the family members to come. And one of the things that usually happens is when poor people die, they're generally numbers. They don't exist as individuals. So we had actually done extensive research and did a profile of every individual who'd been killed and made this interactive display. So they were coming, they were touching it. It was a very moving situation, actually. They held it with their hands. People broke down in tears, but they could see who they were. And they were people like the kid on the top row, the second person. It's a small ID card, you see. That's a 12-year-old kid who'd been working in the factory. The schools were closed because of COVID, and the parents had sent some of them to try and get some extra money. I mean, there was no earning at that time anyway. But these were the sort of things that we were doing. And then let me show you another picture. This is a picture of a little girl holding up her mother's portrait. We, of course, put it up on social media. We invited people. The media really took it on board. And with this, we've actually been able to get a lot of people, not a lot, a few people on social media coming forward to say, I want to take care of this child. I want to pay for her education and that sort of thing. So those were things. But we were also keeping up the pressure on the judicial system, keeping the public engaged alongside supporting the families. But one of the lead images, the image we used for the invitation, was this image of a lock. And this lock was the very lock that the owners had used to close the exit, which prevented the workers from escaping the fire, which essentially this is the lock that killed those people. So we made a huge blow up. I mean, those are the things you can do these days with digital and everything else. And that became a very, very powerful symbol. And now this lock is one that is being used as a point of reference. This is the lock. And by inference, the owners are being linked with that. And we've also in the past, in the Tazreen fashion case, we actually followed up and we managed to get the first conviction against a garment owner. But these were the sort of things we've been trying to do. Now, I don't really see this as a reduction of the scope of photography, but rather an extension of its impact. And Susan would have been there. I think many years ago in Barcelona, we were in a festival, and Christian Cajol was at that time talking about how he was wondering whether, or positing the question, had Billie Jean Smith been alive today, would he have photographed Pittsburgh the same way as he'd photographed it then? I find it a very interesting question. And I muse, I mean, of course, I constantly come across photographers who complain that we no longer have the big picture spreads, no longer, do we have the big budgets? It's true. The world has moved on, the media landscape has moved on, but we also need to respond to that shift. And it doesn't really make sense to stay stuck in a time warp where this is how it used to be, and therefore we will continue to work in this manner. If something else works today, that is how we need to stay relevant. What we've also done is looked at, been doing research, and one of the things we've been looking at is the heritage component. I mean, in terms of heritage, our own institutions don't even recognize photography within the field of heritage, so we're pushing that in. But we've been looking at, as I say, how an individual photographer at a studio, and we've been doing this research on what we call mofusshal photography. Mofusshals are small towns, and a lot of these studios are disappearing. So this, for instance, is a studio portrait of a woman in Obishar studio in Khulna, taken by Tushar Roy Chaudhary in the 1950s. And you have the type of lighting, the posture, the dress that is being used. A lot of it, of course, has disappeared. Let me go to the next one. This is taken in the 1960s by Bishwajit Dash in Ramo Studio. And of course, it's about the photographer himself setting up that old camera and everything else. But what we've also done is in Chobimala, in our own festival, we included a body of work by a former student of Pathshala, Hadiuddin, who was actually a fashion photographer. And then once he joined Pathshala, he began to see how photography was being used, and he began to reflect upon his own practice and his father's practice. His father, in fact, his grandfather was quite a well-known photographer. He has passed away. He did some very important work on the War of Liberation in 1971. But it was his father's studio that he tried to then initially preserve, because Joshua, where he lives, they had over 50 studios, and now there are only 5 or 6. Most of the owners of the studios have changed profession because it's just no longer viable for them to survive like this. We're looking at how a new generation looks at social history. In Hadi's case, it was how his father, a journalist who was in the army police, in the local newspaper, he also was a stringer for a Dhaka newspaper, how he used to work. And his father had been interested in doing a mobile exhibition on a truck. This is what Hadi now, with this work, wants to take on, and perhaps give an opportunity to his father that he never had. So this is work from Hadi's studio, and the picture on the right is the lipstick that is used, or the dye. I don't know if it's real lipstick, but this is his aunt's picture, and of course it was in black and white. It's hand tinted, and this is the stick that's been used to paint the red lipstick on her. So that was quite interesting. This is in our festival itself, in the Chobimala festival. So what we've got is a lot of the artifacts from the studio, the implements that they use for retouching, measuring, and a whole lot of things, some of the negatives, the type of work that a photographic studio used to be involved in, from forensic work to evidential work to weddings, to cricket matches, the picture on the top left, right up there, is actually a photograph of communist militants who had come to the studio to have a group photograph taken. And there is another, which is of some of that group who were taken in the police station, and it was a police mugshot of the people arrested. So you've got both types of images in this same collection. It's an incredible collection that's been put together. And one of the things we're now looking at is, I was just talking to Heather yesterday about how we could team up with researchers and social scientists and historians and maybe even fashion designers and other people to dissect this incredible body of work and place it in terms of today's context. So, because so much of this has disappeared. But I'll move on to something else. I mean, this is a lot about what we show. I think it is also important to talk about what not to show and where to show. And the next set of pictures I'm going to show you are about a show called Embracing the Other. Now, I'm very aware of this ubiquitous Islamophobia that's going on, and I'm not getting into the 20-year Afghan war or anything like that, but you know, the fact that the whole world is genuinely you know, in the hands of warmongers who found Islamophobia as a very convenient way to extend their profits is staggering. But I'm also aware that there are conservative elements within Islam, there are radical elements which also need to be dealt with. One of the things which I thought I would look at is the spaces where you cannot show photography. I'd shown photography in churches, in temples, in synagogues, and never shown it in a mosque. And it was pretty much understood that it could not be done. I mean, in my mother-in-law's house, for instance, figures with photographs are turned around when she prays. And this is very common in many places where you no longer have pictures. When they do calendars, they ask for pictures. We do not have human figures. But the Prophet's mosque in Medina was much more than a mosque. It was an education center. It was a health clinic. He sheltered women. He received state guests. In fact, there was a group from Abyssinia who came and they wanted to show work. They found nowhere. And the Prophet said, use my mosque. So it was also one of the earliest, possibly the earliest gallery or exhibition space. And I use this argument to talk to a mosque called the Baitur Rauf Mosque, a very beautiful mosque, which was designed by a woman architect. The land was donated by her grandmother. And that was a reason for showing it as anyway. But I also wanted to show the beauty of this mosque, but I wanted to show work inside the mosque. And I managed to convince them, based on this idea, this story about the Prophet's mosque, that I want to take your mosque to the way the Prophet had intended it to be. And it's a powerful argument. And they went along with it. And I said, look, there are conditions. You must let everyone enter, whether it's man, woman, whatever religion, whatever sexuality, no limits. And surprisingly, they agreed. And then they changed their mind. The local political group felt that I was intruding into their space and put a stop on it. And they said, well, sorry, you know, we can't fight this. So we decided on doing the next best thing. We were going to show it on the cricket ground next to the mosque where the kids played. And we are setting up this show when the families and people who are the church, mosque goers and their families come and they see this work and they say, why is that being shown in the mosque? I said, you tell me. Let's take it to the mosque. So they took it into the mosque. And that was quite beautiful. And then we, of course, invited everyone in. And as far as I know, I've never seen women sitting in a mosque in this manner or using a mosque in this manner, which we were able to do on that occasion of that exhibit. And it allowed an interaction with a mosque, which many people who've never entered a mosque managed to get. So those were important things. But I'll end with a set of pictures that were part of the Pre-Pictet. The Pre-Pictet is quite a well-known exhibit. I was in the finalists last year, and it was shown at the V&A, and then they were going to tour it. And they said, these are the places it's going to tour. And I was perfectly happy with it. And then I discovered that the show, and it's up there right now, the show is currently at the Eretz Israel Museum in Tel Aviv. And I think all religions have equal rights, and I'm prepared to defend Muslims and Jews and Christians and Hindus if there's injustice done to them. But certainly when it comes to the Palestine situation, I think that people have been wronged in a very, very serious way. And the international community, particularly the West, has played a very responsible role in that. And I'm very supportive of the Palestinian liberation movement. So I was horrified that my work was going to be shown there, and particularly because the theme of the show was hope. And the work, this I should have shown this earlier. This is work from the work I showed in the mosque called Embracing the Other. And it's really a very beautiful mosque, completely lit by natural light. But I'll come to this story, which is what I'd shown at the Hope exhibit. And the woman leaning back her name's Hajira Begum. She's a sex worker. I met her in '96 when I was doing a story on HIV and AIDS, and we've been friends ever since. She had a very difficult life. This is she with her fellow sex workers in the grounds of the Parliament building, which was their beat. And then she did a remarkable thing. A few years back, she gave up her work, took her savings, and she set up an orphanage for the kids, for other kids like her, because she'd been gang raped as a child, she'd been brutalized, she'd been pushed into pickpocketing and then sold to a brothel. Because of unwanted sex, she was physically damaged, she cannot have children. So she'd gone through all of this, but rather than be bitter about it, she decided she would do something about it. So she took her savings, and then she set up an orphanage. And this is a photograph of her now in her orphanage, and she's teaching Fatima to read and write. And they have a small place, so the floor doubles as a giant blackboard. So they use that, and she teaches Fatima to read and write. But for me, this was so phenomenal. And I could not see how something about hope could be shown in Tel Aviv at a time like this and be said to represent hope uncritically. Sadly, what we talked about was that we would have a discussion in Photo London afterwards. It was meant to have happened yesterday, and then I looked at the list. There was a photographer who'd shown work, and then myself and Gideon Mendel, who didn't show work. I was meant to be speaking on our behalf, but there was a representative from Eretz Israel Museum, which is fine, but no Palestinian representative. So when I raised this, they said, no, we're going to address this, and then I see that that program's gone. Maybe it'll happen again, I don't know. But all I want to talk about really was the fact that it's not merely what the photograph is about or what is within that frame, but how you use this incredible tactile medium for whatever you can, whenever you can, in whatever capacity you can. And I think we as practitioners need to recognize the power of this medium, and that power doesn't stop with the photographic image or the printed image, but it manifests itself through the many ways in which we can put it into action. And I'll end with that. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Shahidul. I'm sure there's been many questions and follow-ups in due course. So thank you once again. So next we go to Sokphea Young, before then returning to concluding collaborative conversation, folding the two presentations into each other. So Sokphea, are you ready? And you're going to speak for about 15 minutes, I gather. We can't actually hear you, Sokphea, but that's
Yeah.
Yeah, we can now. Great.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. So today I'm gonna talk about what Chris has mentioned. So I have changed slightly a little bit on the title of the paper. So to become what I call the eyes of the and pineapple. So this talk will focus on Cambodia, as you know, my research. So I think in order to illustrate my argument here, so I would like to show you what it is happening in Cambodia and in terms of the history of the photograph and also the development of the visual representation in Cambodia. So in this graph, it explains the development of photography and digital image in Cambodia. So Cambodia photography have developed from what I call like scarcity to abundance, from analog to the digital technologies. It developed from atrocities image and what it is called as well in the collective memory to peace and development. So as you can see from the red dot in here, it is a photograph that was actually introduced to Cambodia by John Thompson in 1867 when he was the first person who photographed Cambodia, Angkor Wat. So the photograph actually began to develop slowly, but from just around 1950s, and then it interrupted by what it is called the Khmer Rule in 1975, 1980, something like that. So the black line is the number of population during that time. So as you can see now, the number of photographs are now actually outnumber number of people given how digital photograph and as well as smartphone are increasing. So along this development of contact in Cambodia, so I want to build on what I have been doing in terms of ethnographic research as an in-person fieldwork plus recent digital technology, digital ethnography during the pandemic this time. So I want to argue that photography in Cambodia developed from analog to digital and from being unseen to seen, from being oppressive, being oppressed to emancipating of citizenship. So I argue that citizens possess the ability to create their own news image that X-rays society, social and political economic activities, or even in a country. Through citizen photojournalists, citizens are performing what I call it here from other scholar words is about visual performative. So such performative actually encountered by what is called counter movement of the ruling system or the surveillance system. So this surveillance system revealed what I call in a Cambodian political cultures or the notion of what it is eyes of pineapples. So I will illustrate later what does it mean by the eyes of pineapple. So this is the eye of the pineapple. So in Cambodia, in the early 2000s as well in 2010, the scholar like Liberate plus the Henry Lockhart wrote about Pol Pot, Little Red Book, and they argue that Angka is a Khmer word that means organization. So Angka is the Khmer rule regime that controlled Cambodia in 1975 to 1979, which was commonly as known as like a Leninist or Maoist style of communist leadership that wished to see Cambodia as an equal society. As such, everyone like had to strip off their wealth and also rank to become a farmer. So all of them have to work as a farmer in the field. So because of forced labor plus any starvations and also illness and also tortures, and up to 2 million of Cambodians were killed as a result of that. So they suggest that Angka has eyes of pineapple. That means they can see panoptically around, to use the term by Michel Foucault in the Discipline and Punishment book like that. So everyone in Angka, especially those who serve as a farmer, they spy on each other to ensure that every people or citizen during the Angka period are loyal to their Angka. So one of the iconic photograph you can see here is one of the atrocity. It was like in S21 in a black and white photo IDs. So this victim was actually forced to confess as an enemy of Angka before she was killed. So this form of photograph serve as both a record of Angkar, what I call it, the perfectionism of Angkar or Khmer rule work, and also a form of punishment imposed by Angkar against the citizen as an enemy. I will explain later in terms of what it's meant by the enemy. So while photograph was actually used as a mean of Angkar for the purpose like as in S21 prison, so the photography was actually one of the tools to incriminate those owners and those in the photograph. So the Khmer rule was much opposing the Western capitalist system. So before the Khmer rule, this photograph actually taken before the Khmer rule. So it can be used as an identity of several generations in here if it is revealed to the Khmer rule during that time, so they can trace from like the grandfathers to the grandson, for example, or grandparent to the grandchildren like that. So not many photographs that were taken before the Khmer rule actually survive because they have to burn it down or even bury them in order to eliminate the trace of evident identities or what is called the form of like Western ideologies in terms of photograph. So as I mentioned earlier, that photograph was very much a form of scarcity, but now as the region is globalized and mobile phone and smartphone camera are affordable, there is a rise in photographic practice by citizens. So amateur photography, photographer, or what is called like citizen of photography, to use the term of Ariela Asole, is rising throughout the digital and medias and platform. So photographs are moved from analog to digital, and also digital photography has now outnumbered of Cambodian population like that. So as you can see here, people are now using smartphone rather than the analog photography anymore. So in the 1980s, James Scott, a famous scholar of Southeast Asian study, pointed out that the remote area or indigenous people communities seek to live far away from the state in order to avoid the state control. But as of now, because our internet is democratized and the medium of photography is now available, so as you can see here in this photograph, it is the antenna of internet and mobile phone service that, and also reception that is installed at one of the remote areas of Cambodia, where a lot of indigenous people are living. So as the internet and smartphone became a popular mean of and create ability to hear and see from far away, Cambodian and as well as indigenous people in these areas are now using them as their service. So in Cambodia, we have 16 million as population, but if we talk about how many mobile phone and smartphone camera are subscribed, so we have up to 22 million of mobile phone or smartphone camera in the country. That means at least one person possess at least two smartphone in this context. So why a lot of Cambodian people are now much in terms of like digital camera as well as the smartphone camera, because there is an increase of technology that provide a lot of testimony, what it is called in the Buddhist prohexy, that people can hear, or people have a magic eye and magic ear, because they can see and even hear from very far away in this context. So as in this, so in the map here is about how the mobile phone plus the internet receptions are available in the country, almost up to 90% of the country. So, and this is a diagram of one of the interlocutor that I observed, that he has 1,000 friends on Facebook. As long as he submit or even post a photograph on the platform, and it's gonna circulate beyond the country across the world as a part of their presentation like that. So in the past, we have like one image remain in one place, but now one image is now available everywhere as at any time. So at the availability of the net and democratization of smartphone camera, digital camera provoke a new form of alternative news and image making. Previously, images were actually rely on cameramen and professional and photojournalists, for example. So Cambodia now are excited as they can create news and image and also broadcast across the borders and reaching out 100,000 or up to million of people that can use. So this famous monk is a Buddhist monk that called his name Venerable Luan Savat, who turned himself actually from an ordinary monk to a citizen photojournalist who used digital camera to capture photo and videos and any political and social activities. So he called himself alternatively as a multimedia monk, for example. So this form of citizen photojournalist is an agent of photography which rely on visual production rather than written text in the conventional photojournalist practice. So there are several arguments pertaining to the role and agency of the citizen journalist in this context. So some of the scholars would say that citizen journalist is a type of like first person report, a temporary person who adopt that kind of like journalist role in order to make news. And also citizen photojournalists provide what they call alternative mainstream media coverage of conflict, terrors, wars, and less ideologically violent content in this context. But based on my fieldwork, ethnographic fieldwork, I define citizen photojournalists in this context as a visual performative citizenship who actually employ their rights and agency to make the voice of the voiceless, unprivileged, unheard, unseen, to become seen and heard through the visual representation. So I place this context of like a non-citizenship and citizenship to use the term of Ariela Soleil and argue that citizen who are affordable to the camera, phone, and also like the Buddhist, like this Buddhist monk are now image brokers who act as a citizen photojournalist. So citizen photojournalists represent non-citizen in this context as a form to ensure that there is a visibility of the unprivileged citizenship or non-citizenship. So a photograph like this, you can see from here in the urban areas, like this photograph cannot be captured by those professional photographer or photojournalists, for example. So the government officials actually are slapping a man on the street. So so this photograph is actually captured by citizen photojournalists like that. So as the photograph is now posted onto the public domain of the digital platform, it became a public power that leverage pressures on the misconduct and the violent acts of the official. As you can see here, citizen photojournalists now represent what it is like the victim or the non-citizens who actually incriminated by the rulers or the powerful official in this context. Not only in the urban, but also we can observe the practice of such doing so in the rural areas where environmental protection efforts have been making and also practice some sort of like a citizen photojournalist as well. So the aim is to protect environment resource and of the non-privileged communities. So youth activists use smartphone camera to document and publicize environmental issue in a country, like deforestation in this context. So a group of indigenous people called Prelang Community Forest actually protecting the forest by using photograph as a mean of leveraging some sort of like public awareness on that. So as the photograph actually public insert some sort of public powers, so it creates a notion that I call here nationalism, because image of the photo of the environmental issue actually invoke a concern of the whole country about protecting environment, as well as the population of the world as well who cares about environment and also forest in general. So the protection of environment and also the photograph as a form of nationalism perspective like that. So this is what I call the return of eyes and apple in the context of Cambodia. So in 2010, Hitler argued that in his like optical media spoke that machine take tasks, drawing, writing, seeing, hearing, word processing, memories, and also making even knowing better than human capacities. So drawing on so-called work on the discipline and punishment the concept of like panopticon or panoptic present self, this device actually gradually observe and incubate in our body, mind without warning us. So like you can see that the health application app are now an example of how they steal the data from us. So as we unintendedly concede or consent to do so, this device have incubate and extract our personal private data from the buyers. For the buyers and for the commercial and political purpose, device analyze, for example, image and photograph that we made. So while this is true and verified by many studies, including Susanna Vubo that work on surveillance capitalist system, Cambodia photography and surveillance system have provided a further explanation from the political cultures as well as the visual understanding. So as I argued earlier, the metaphor that I propose here is that the smartphone, like seeing like the iPhone here, in the first they have just 3 cameras, now develop something in the future, it might be the same thing like this. And the metaphor here is that the smartphone is now become what it is called the eyes of pineapple that can see and observe us every time. So as in this context, so it creates a metaphor that linked to our argument in the Anka that has eye of pineapple. So as in the case Cambodia, you can see from here, the first photograph is actually the photograph of the ruler Cambodia actually that install and display everywhere around the corners of the office, at the meeting hall and on the street and at any time. So this kind of display, actually the ruler appear to have seen and watching you all the time. So this form of display and also production of the ruler photograph either online or offline or have reintroduced what the eye of pineapple. As in this case, photograph is the omnipresent of powers of the ruler. So the power that can see you or censor you at any time, at any place. So the digital cameras and visual politics is now gaining a lot of traction in here. So for example, you can see here, even in your watch, so it might be watching you as well when you use the watch like that. So this photograph of the supreme leader actually watching you. So what does it mean, this context of the eyes and pineapple in the context of photojournalists? So based on my review and as well as the calculation of the many people that were arrested actually throughout the years, you can see here is a number of people, or citizen photojournalists or activism that were arrested by the government because of their activities along the year in each year. So it keeps increasing because of the surveillance system of the photograph that you post online and offline is now returning back to you as a person who developed and as well create the photograph. So one example in here, the Buddhist monk in here that I illustrated earlier, that his active participation in environmental protection, social, and also political activity are now seeking to be arrested, and then he fled the country to live in Switzerland like that. So in a general term, I argue that the rise of the digital social medias, the rise of photojournalists, and also the rise of digital image making create a form of like emancipation of citizenship that perform performative citizenship through visual representation. But in the meantime, there is a fight back and flashback in terms of counter movement by the ruling system, as you can see here in terms of a number of people arrested in this context. So thank you very much on this.
Okay, thank you very much, Sokphea. I think your presentation suggests lots of points of interaction and resonance with Shahiduls, not least the way in which the omnipresent image of Hun Sen makes one think of the omnipresence of images of Mujib and Sheikh Hasina, that one can't help feel watching one wherever one goes in urban and rural Bangladesh. And I was also wondering whether the anchor pineapple would be one of the motifs or cosmologies that could be offered in response to the earlier conversation in the first session about the desirability of decolonizing photographic theory. The question there would be whether one can replace the Foucauldian panopticon with the Khmer anchor pineapple. It would be interesting to discuss that in more detail. But I had a slightly more detailed question for Shahidul to kick things off, which is that I couldn't decide whether you did answer or didn't answer the nominal question of your presentation, which was, does photojournalism still matter? And if in thinking about the possibility that you had answered it, it struck me that the way you might have answered it was to say that actually photojournalism has changed. It's become something that very much involves community research, community engagement, affirmation. It's no longer, if it ever was in a Bangladeshi context, the action of the lone camera person with apparatus. It's diffused into something much more, well, it's something more activist, something more community located, something perhaps a bit harder to put one's finger on.
I don't know if that's a question, Chris, but I'll try and answer it regardless.
An idea for ruminating on.
Yes, well, first, I mean, photography for me is what it does. I mean, the reason I came into the medium was because I recognized the power of the medium, what it could do. I still consider it to be an extremely powerful medium, but I think if we limit it to merely the pretty picture or the interesting picture for academic debate or in a museum, we've, I think, undermined its potential. I think today it's a much more pliable medium which can be in the hands of many other people. And one of the things I constantly do feel is that photography is far too important to be left just to photographers. So I think while on the one hand, many other people need to take on board this remarkable media, I think photographers themselves need to open up to the possibilities of the medium and take on a much more pluralistic take. And what I was trying to show was essentially how we use photography in terms of day-to-day practice. I mean, the Cambodian speaker spoke, of course, of how it was used by the oppressors and now how it's being used by some others. But I think this thing about it's like guerrilla warfare. The state is very powerful. It has money. It has muscle. It can do all sorts of things. But I think individually, we as photographers can do a lot. We collectively can do a lot more. And that is perhaps where we fail, where we've not really taken on the possibilities of the medium and limited it to how it was classically defined.
Okay, well, at this point, it'd be good to open out the conversation. So I would encourage anyone who wants to join in to either raise their hand or to type in chat your chance to interact with two people who are thinking at the cutting edge of the authoritarian co-option of image making in South and Southeast Asia.
I think Evelyn's got her hand raised for some time.
Oh, okay, well spotted. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Evelyn Runge. I work at Cologne University in Germany. Thank you very much for this great event. I would like to address the question of platforms. So what do you think changed due to social media and platforms? Do you have, let's say, a more globalized or more aware audience that you had in analog times? Or would you think that maybe it didn't change so much like the social media world? Thank you.
Is it addressed to anyone in particular?
I think.
Well, I would appreciate an answer of both of you, but maybe you are more experienced also, sorry to say that, due to your age, to the analog world. So you maybe—
I have the white beard, yes.
A comparison.
Okay. Well, firstly, I think the big shift is that in the early days, you could take the picture, but you had very little control in how the picture was being used. The publisher had almost exclusive control on how that image would be used, disseminated, and to what purpose. Today, I think that can be challenged in many, many ways. And certainly the photographer himself or herself today can be a publisher. So that's one big shift, but the others, and these are some of the things we are now considering, how collectively you can actually campaign in situations. Of course, the powerful also have the same tool in their hands, and they have trolls and they have bots and they have budgets through which they can counter what you do. But I constantly feel that, as I say, you know, they have money and their muscle. We have integrity and we have passion. And I consider this to be our tools to be no less than theirs. The medium itself is extremely pliable. There is a lot that can be done with it. I think to a very large extent, we have not explored that potential. And one of the things that is very true in Bangladesh is because at the moment, mainstream media is almost entirely controlled either by the government or corporations which are subservient to the government. The normal avenues have been closed. So the activism is taking place online and through social media.
Sokphea, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think there is a pro and con in terms of how it is playing a role in that context. So comparing analog and digital photography, so the platform actually induce some sort of like a number of photo and also citizen photojournalists, for example, in this context. So there are increasing effectiveness of that in the meantime. For example, as you can say from Shahidul work in Bangladesh, of the photograph of the building that keep posting and mobilizing people, everyone using media as that to actually demolish the building. As a result of that is also one of the things that can be counted as effective of the effectiveness of the photograph through the digital platform as well. But in the meantime, we all acknowledge that our submission to the digital technology is one of our weaknesses as well. So in this context, compare between the northern as well as compare the north and the global south country, for example. So digital media and platform actually reinforce authoritarianism in the global south, but in the meantime, it also play a part in the global north as well, in the Western country, that digital media platform actually support any right-wing, for example, of the politician and political activists in this context. So I would say there's a change in that. And then people are now accustomed themselves to the digital platform. In the morning, you need to check your phone and check your Facebook or check your any other Instagram platform like that. So it has affected our life. Thank you.
So are there any other raised hands that I'm missing at the moment? While someone raises their hand, could I ask Shahidul, for your thoughts about what you've conceptualized and organized in the past as majority world photography. I was wondering whether you had any comments on the earlier discussion about decolonizing photographic theory and decolonizing photographic practice. Does that strike you still as urgent and necessary as when you founded Majority World?
I think the terrain has shifted. By the way, Konstantinos had a raised hand, but I'll answer this and then go on to that. Sadly, I didn't attend the entire session. I'd wanted to, but I was sort of multitasking, so moving from one to the other. But I think the big difference really is that the fact that today, I mean, certainly when I started photography, it was the movement of photographers was very unidirectional. It was white Western photographers coming to countries like mine, taking pictures, going back. Today, certainly there are many local photographers telling their own stories. So that shift has taken place. It's taken place for various reasons, some of it political, some of it economic, because budgets have changed. And of course, internet has allowed access. So there are multiple reasons for that happening, which is all healthy. But one of the things I do want to bring about, mention is when I talk about white Western photographers coming to take pictures, I don't actually have a problem with others taking pictures in my country. I think my point of view needs to be challenged just as much as anyone else. And certainly I can get fatigued, I can be blind to certain things which I'm close to. All of those are valid. My problem is the exclusive monopoly that for a very long time white Western photographers have had in representing me, which is why I began to introduce the term majority world, because firstly, I didn't want to be third world and they be first world. I never accepted that definition, but also in a place where they talk about democracy and freedom, the fact that we happen to be the majority of humankind and we never chose them to be our representatives or to decide what our lives should be is something I do want to constantly remind people of. So I think in that sense, it is valid. What still does happen is the figures are there. I mean, now there is much more talk about diversity and things like George Floyd and other things have brought to the surface racial tensions and other things which perhaps were not as explicitly defined before. But if you look at the statistics, then certainly the power is still very much in the hands of a white elite in the North in terms of photography, and that does need to change. But I will turn back to a statement by Stuart Hall, where he says a black person with a black camera will not necessarily take black photographs. Each one of us is a political animal who subscribes to certain ideologies, and the photographs we take is an effect of all those composite influences that surround us. And I think it would be unfair and unjust to generalize on the basis of white Western photography or majority world photography. I think at the end of the day, you need to look at the photography and the photographic practice and assess it on that basis. But the need for majority world appreciation and the fact that there needs to be a platform for majority world practitioners is still very, very true.
Kostis, did you want to come in?
Yeah, a short one for Shahidul. Could you perhaps tell us a little about how the landscape of the people who commission these photographs has perhaps changed? So you gave a very interesting picture of your curation and the community-based work, which may be understood as a form of deviation from that hegemonic white photographer. They must be represented, they cannot represent themselves sort of thing, citing the Marx's epigram in Said. But can you tell us about the people who actually commission, the media, the media heads, the employers of these photographers? How has their demands for the kinds of images that are desirable changed over those years? And are they too listening to the kind of work you're doing and then perhaps reincorporating as a means of showing their, humanist or politicized or their, whatever profile that is deemed necessary from their perspective?
I think they listen reluctantly. They listen because they don't have a choice. And I think that is the point I want to make. I think and space doesn't happen by itself. You need to create it. And it is through the work that we are doing that we try and create space. Now, the show I mentioned, all the work that I showed you is self-commissioned work. It's personal work that we've done. So what we've done is we have an agency, we try and generate a surplus, and we use that surplus to produce work which others would not either show or sponsor. But there is obviously a limitation. What happens is much of the sponsorship is by the corporate world or the NGO world. And even in the NGO world, which supposedly is much more open about development and things like that, our practice or our observation is it's also propaganda. They want to raise funds, they want to show their sponsors that the money has been well used, and they use photographers to tell that story, whether that is the truth or not. And photographers find it difficult because at the end of the day, they need to survive and they need to work with these clients on these commissions. So what we have tried to do is, to a large extent, find a balance where we do commercial work, which we do for clients, and we identified that as work where the client has editorial control. Where we do our own work, we have a very, very clear position that there is no editorial control. This is our point of view. And it's particularly relevant when it comes to our festival, because in our festival, we do have sponsors, but we actually have any sponsor who comes on signing to a contract or an understanding that they have zero editorial control. And that is the only basis on which we take on a sponsor. And we have in the past turned down sponsors because they've not accepted that premise. So that is how we've tried to find a balance, but it's a difficult one, I recognize that.
So I can see Gabriella von Broek has a raised hand.
Yes, I'd just like to ask Shahidul to clarify an ethnographic detail. When you mentioned that your mother-in-law turns the photos around in the house when she prays. Is that so that she can focus exclusively on God rather than be distracted by the images, or is there any other reason?
No, I think it is because in Islam, the figure is forbidden. Depiction of the human figure is forbidden, either in 3D forms or figuratively in art or whatever. So in a lot of art forms, for instance, the muslin fabric, which came down from the Mughals, never used figures. They used other motifs, geometrical motifs. Animals are okay, but human figures are not, because the principle is that Islam prohibits idolatry. And it comes from that human figures can be idealized, which is not permitted by Islam. So I think that is the principle behind it. But of course, it's not uniform. In Bangladesh, it's mostly Sunni Islam. In Iran, for instance, with the Shiite, the same principle does not apply. I have actually seen images of the prophets on pictures which are inside a mosque itself. So it's certainly not uniform.
Okay, thanks. But so she's not worried to have the pictures on display when she's not praying?
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, when you're praying, that is when you need to be closer to God, and that's perhaps when the rules are more strictly applied.
Thank you.
We had a written comment from Ileana Selajan, who's one of the Photo Demos collective who works in Nicaragua, and I take its theme to be about the power of photography. Your talks made me think about how regardless of the massive efforts to censor dissent, photography always finds a way to seep through. Activists can be quite stubborn and relentless, sure, but still it strikes me that there's something indelible about photography in this sense. So in terms of securing civil liberties, does photography remain a most immediate recourse, a first line of defense in confrontation with immediate threats from the state, and persistently so, the more those states close in? And if I could add to that, Shahidul, you were recently on a Labour Party human rights webinar, which reached very depressing conclusions about the collapse of civil society in Bangladesh and the difficulty of protesting I mean, does what Ileana is saying here resonate in any way, that almost the last line of defense might be the camera?
Well, if you look at it, the fact that I was arrested and tortured and spent over 100 days in jail was because I was live streaming. I had pictures, and I think when all our governments over the last 50 years have been repressive at various levels, we've had extrajudicial killings, we've had disappearances, we've had torture. Whenever you bring it up, the standard response is denial. Photography is something that makes that denial more difficult. And while I'm uncomfortable with the level of surveillance there is, some of the reasons why we've been able to hold people to account is because they have been captured on CCTV doing things they have denied having done. So when they, for instance, came to arrest me, I was physically sitting exactly where I am now on the 5th of August 2018 when they came in. The first thing they did was to tape up all the CCTVs in the building. And when they went, they took the hard disk away with them. So obviously, the threat of the photograph and its veracity and the fact that people still believe photographic evidence is very much there. And that is why people like us are such a threat to them.
So I was very struck, Shahidul, by the question of the Moffasil studios and your interest and enthusiasm in them. And one could imagine other photographers, other practitioners who would see an enormous genre divergence and difference between photojournalistic practice and, you know, vernacular small town endeavors. Could you talk a bit more about that? I mean, what it is you, so there's obviously some kind of crossover there. There's some linkage. You sense some, you know, commensuration between the two. So can you give us a bit more insight into that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we did in terms of process was to involve students in the research methodology. So while students love taking pictures and like having exhibitions and things, they don't, by and large, like doing research too much, or even write or read too much, sadly. This was a way in which we could introduce them into the wealth of information, not merely in terms of what the photograph contained physically, but in terms of how it related to society at that time, in terms of the many layered readings one can make, not only of photographs, but also of archives, that we found very valuable. I mean, for me, something which is very unfortunate is we have a Department of Archaeology which has, I hope it still has, 60,000 8x10 glass plates. And they're sitting out in the open air, getting fungus and getting destroyed as we speak. And there is no one that cares about it. The problem is that type of work actually requires resources which you and I do not usually have. These are the resources that bigger organizations, museums, universities, governments will often have, but they very rarely have, at least in my country, have an interest in that. So what we've been trying to do is to at least make people aware of the value of what these Moffasil studios have and what we are losing if we allow them to disappear. And hopefully through this work, we will be able to raise this awareness. And the fact that Hadi went back to his own studio, he himself, while being the son of a photographer who was running a studio that was fading away, had not considered it. But once he came to the school, once he got involved, and then with other photographers, went back to rediscover his own father's studio, and then that was reintroduced into the biggest contemporary photography event in this region, I think is one of those ways in which you can create visibility, and through that visibility, give a stamp of validity to these archives.
And in an age of COVID and increased repression? How do you see the future for Chobe Mela?
Well, the festival in 2019, the decision for the festival was taken at a time when I was in jail, when we didn't know if I was going to come out of jail, and certainly when I would come out of jail, but we decided to go ahead with it anyway. We knew we would have lost all our sponsors, which we did, or at least all our corporate sponsors. We went along regardless. And something very interesting happened. What we did, this rigged election took place on the 30th of December 2018. The festival was in early February 2019. So 2 months, just 2 months after, less than 2 months after this government had usurped an election. And we, in our open session, spoke about freedom of thought and expression in South Asia. And what has happened since then is we've been approached by organizations that have nothing to do with photography. Trade unions, workers groups, human rights groups, who say we need to learn from this. How come a photographic event can, in the face of such repression, such fear, still be able to be so defiant and make a statement? We need to learn from this. And what we are doing through this is actually expanding our base. And I think we are building synergies across medium, across professions, which is something that we've needed to do all along and we've never really done fully. And in a sense, it is this repression that has forced us into that. So there might be something good coming out of it as well. But to answer your question, in short, it's not going to be an easy fight, but we are fighting.
So I think to wrap up, there's a final comment in chat from Oksana Sarkisova, which the question bit of it may touch on what you've just said, Shahidul. Thank you for these great presentations. I have a question for Shahidul. I'm very much impressed by the creativity and impact that you achieve with the collective action you were engaged with. I'm wondering how much thought planning you give to the preservation and future possible reuses of the images. What archival practices you find most relevant and appropriate to preserve the context and integrity of the photographic works of the community in the long term. So I suppose that's what, you know, what are the afterlives of these events and archives?
Well, firstly, I must admit that this is an area where I'm largely ignorant. I recognize the importance and value of it, but I also recognize my own limitations in terms of knowledge in this area. So one of the things we are beginning to do is to work with other organizations who are more knowledgeable than us. But some of the concerns is, you know, I live and work in Bangladesh and I can put all this together, but as I was picked up in the middle of the night and taken away, my collection can also be picked up and taken away because of the muscle power that these people have. So one of the dilemmas that I now have is for the preservation of this material, at least the physical material, while I need to do it and I want it to belong to my country and belong to my people, I also recognize the vulnerability of it being where it is, and feel that maybe I should compromise and allow it to be preserved somewhere where it can actually be less vulnerable. At a digital level, one of the things we are also looking at is technology that prevents hijacking, technology that prevents surveillance, and ways in which we can ensure the longevity in a cost-effective manner. We don't have answers to many of these, and I think the fact that you've done a thing like this is wonderful, because there might well be other people out there who are far more knowledgeable than we are, and I would be very open to building partnerships. I recognize that our ability is limited, but I also recognize the value of what needs to be done, and I would very much welcome partnerships where others could share their knowledge and we could share their wisdom.
Sounds good. So to wrap up, finally, there's a comment largely directed at Sokphea from Emily Morgan. I'm wondering about the role of anonymity versus recognizability for photographers and citizen photographers working in authoritarian societies. Sokphea mentioned the ability of citizen photographers to capture events such as the slap that could not be imaged by professional photographers. But a known photographer can also turn the attentions of their existing audience to an event or situation, thus raising awareness. Sokphea noted that the Venerable Luan Sovath began working as a citizen photojournalist, but that when his identity became known, when he became known as a photographer, it was then that, like Shahidul, he became a target himself. Could you speak to the roles of anonymity versus recognizability in present photojournalistic practice? So maybe we could conclude with some comments from you, Sokphea, and then Shahidul, just a few sentences on your current working method and need to keep a low profile.
Right, thanks a lot, Emily. So interesting question. I think there is a back and forth between the two, ability to be seen and ability to anonymize yourself. So I speak as a context of Southeast Asia in the past as the way that you want to fight with the government or ruler is that to avoid the rulers. In the past. So the farmers, the indigenous people seek to isolate themselves, living far away from them as a tool to fight against them. So the ruler will know you, then they cannot do anything with you. And then, but this context, when it comes to digital technologies, it became a dangerous job for journalists as well as citizen journalists as well, that we all aware that journalists' work is very dangerous when it comes to not only is about the threat by the ruling system, but also by any activity that they have been doing. So anonymity is difficult to achieve in a time of like a global surveillance system like this. So for example, when you subscribe to digital media, you all give them everything, your identity, privacy, data, anything to them like that. So the issue is that how we fight against the global capitalist system of the surveillance system. So I think Shahidul will say a lot more on this regarding how to ensure privacy, how to anti the surveillance system like that. So Zuana Rubov also mentioned that the only thing that we can also fight this is about the law, because the corporate capitalists of the surveillance system is very much a threat of the law. So you need to develop law in a proper way in that context. Thank you.
Shahidul, did you want to round off by telling us about your current practices, or without disclosing too much?
Well, the first thing I'm doing is, it's not so much current practice in terms of photography, but current practice in terms of survival. I used to go around on a bicycle. That was my mode of, normal mode of conveyance. I would stop in the streets, I would meet passers-by, I would talk to them. That was the way I worked. Today, my family doesn't allow me to get on a bicycle anymore. I'm not allowed to ever be on my own in public. And that obviously changes things. You can no longer work the way you used to. You have to find other ways of doing things. So that has in a very clear methodological sense, affected the way I work. So I'm now producing different types of work. I actually now do a lot more studio work than I used to. I try and develop projects where I can work in a very different manner. The other thing I never do now is to carry a mobile phone, because I will get tracked and surveillance will be there. So even in terms of communication, there is a difference. But I don't think all my work is about photographs I've produced. You know, the students I've produced is also my work. The institutions I've produced is also my work. The projects I initiate are also my work. And I think we as photographers tend to think of the image that we produced as being the only creative output. I don't think that. And in fact, at a time like this, when institutions have been completely decimated by the regime, I think building strong, robust institutions that have the ability to resist is as useful a way to fight back as producing the individual image. And in fact, producing the individual image has never been what I've concentrated on right from the beginning. I've been working on building institutions. And whereas many other photographers who've worked at the same time have produced phenomenal bodies of work which I'm very respectful of, I'm aware that I've not done that. I've actually done very, very little photography. But what I've been able to do for the community, I think, is as important. And that for me is fine. I don't need to be the celebrated photographer as long as the footprint is there and I can in some way leave behind a better planet than I found.
Well, thank you both very much for inspiring, chilling, somewhat forbidding, but also very illuminating discussion. So great to have you both participating, and thank you once again.